Welcome to the Wise Idea Weekly Podcast with Christopher J. Harris, focusing on life, leadership, family, marriage, and the church. We are providing tools for our inspiration and wisdom for life. Our goal is to inspire everyday people to live wise lives. If you're new to us, we release a brand new podcast weekly on Thursdays. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. Here's our host, Christopher J. Harris.
Hello, my friends. Welcome again to another episode of the Wise Idea Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. I'm so excited to have you guys tune in every single week. I cannot believe that I am rolling right up close to 40 episodes already this year, guys. It has been an amazing journey, and I'm so blessed to have all of you that tune in. And you know, it's really cool because when I started this journey just a few months ago, I wasn't sure who was going to listen in, but the feedback has been incredible, and our audience is incredibly diverse. I've got all kinds of faith backgrounds, all kinds of races, all kinds of geographical areas. I looked at our stats the other day and discovered that we've got regular listeners that are tuning in from the down under, from Australia and from the UK. So glad to have all of you tuning in from all around the world. We have been in an incredible set of conversations known as a series over the past few weeks around, can we defend the church? And make no mistake about it, the church has its share of issues, but I believe in the church. I believe in the local church. I believe in its value. And I don't think we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And just like in your family sometimes has issues, but you have to work through them. And so I've had a number of incredible guests on in the past that have helped us navigate this conversation. And today is no exception. I have the Bishop Derek Triplett on the line with us. He's hanging out, going to have this incredible conversation. And the only thing that we've got to ask for forgiveness for him for is the fact that he is a University of Florida Gator fan. Other than that, y'all, Wow. This is going to be a crazy, incredible, fun conversation. Bishop Triplett, how are you, sir?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you for having me, and go Gators.
Well, we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that some other time. I do recognize that we've got folks, again, from all over the United States and all over the world. And so if you are not from the southern part of the United States, you have no idea how much of a big deal college football is, and particularly the rivalry between the University of Florida Gators and the Florida State Seminoles. So it's all in fun, though, because when you're from the state of Florida, you're either one of three things, and I don't know if that's expanding now. We got other universities coming online, so we don't want to discredit them either. But anyway.
Absolutely,
yeah. So Bishop Triplett, let's jump into it, sir. Let's talk a little bit about who you are first. Let's introduce you, who you are. Let everybody know a little bit about your background, and then what your passions are.
Well, I've been in ministry for over 30 plus years. Spent the majority of that in pastoral ministry as far as the local congregation, as well as national and international reformational work. Stepped away from all of that at the leading of God a couple of years ago, including the pastoral ministry. And we, at this point, do several things. We do leadership training and coaching. We also do relationship training and coaching. And we spend a lot of time writing, a lot of time with pastors, trying to come alongside them and assist them in making their congregations the best that they can be. It's a significant opportunity right now because our culture is so diverse, and not just diverse as it relates to ethnicity or race, but diverse as it relates to philosophy and theology. And now pastors are having to do more than they thought that they would ever have to do in many cases, because we are in such a just a mashup of things coming together that it becomes real important to get the help. And I'm the guy who comes in and gives the help where needed. And it's a powerful time. We spend a lot of time with pastors, but we also spend a lot of time with the leaders as they come alongside their pastors. So it's a good time for us. It's still strange not getting up every Sunday morning and mounting the pulpit of the Hope Fellowship Church, but we're adjusting.
Absolutely, absolutely, and his reputation speaks for itself. Bishop Triplett has a long lineage of ministry as well. I am a huge fan of your dad, Bishop Triplett,
Absolutely.
and he is a brilliant mind. And although he's seasoned now, I absolutely enjoy sitting down and listening and learning from him and gleaning from him. And
there's nothing like him. There's nothing like him. If God has blessed me at all, one of the things that he's blessed me with is to be the son of Bishop Tommy L. Triplett Jr. and to be the preaching son of Bishop Tommy L. Triplett Jr. And so he's incredible. I'll be with him in a couple of days.
And that's pressure too.
Oh, it's pressure. You want to talk about pressure. It's one thing to preach in his pulpit every now and then, but it's a crazy thing that for the last 2 years, I preach in his pulpit every month. And so it is, he laughs and he thinks I'm playing, but it's a scary thing.
No, that's it. So let's deal with this. Let's deal with this church. Our I don't know. We're in love with the church. What are you seeing? I mean, you've been in ministry now 3 decades. So what are you seeing? I mean, when you think about everything that we see in the media, you think about the internal stuff that you're doing with the coaching and the consulting, you think about just your own life, what you've seen over the 30 years. What are you seeing?
It's an interesting question. I'm seeing something different right now than I saw 3 years ago. Here's why. My lens has changed. My lens has changed because I'm not just the pastor in the pulpit anymore. Everything you see depends on the lens you're looking out of and the perspective that you're looking from. So I've been doing, local church ministry and reformational ministry. And so you look at it a certain way. Now, when I'm not preaching, I'm in the pews. And so I'm able to look at a church from a perspective that I haven't been able to look at it for 30 years. I'm now, I've filtered myself out of the sacred cows. I've filtered myself out of what I call now the unnecessaries of church. In many cases, the things that you have to do to perpetuate and facilitate congregational ministry. I don't have to do that anymore. I help others do that, but it makes me see things differently. And a few of the things that I'm seeing right now is that in many cases, we are not prepared for the day. And in many cases, we don't want to be prepared for the day. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you are pastoring right now in the United States of America, you are changing. You are changing your methods, you are changing your perspectives, you are doing all of that if you're going to be culturally relevant. There are ministries that aren't changing and won't change because my dad and I had this conversation. There are some ministries and pastors that are too far down the road to change. And to change now would upset the apple cart of their church. And so they can be quote unquote successful without being culturally relevant. Because there are enough people, especially in the African American experience, there are enough people who simply want to come and have church. And if I can get enough people who simply want to have church, and I do church very well, as we say it from a colloquial perspective, not what Jesus meant as the church, but if I do church real well, I can get enough people who just want to do that and never have to be culturally relevant.
Wow. You just threw so much at us. What you just said is a whole series by itself. Let's break a couple things down really fast.
Okay.
You use the phrase sacred cows. Some people hear that, they may not know what that is. So let's talk really quickly about that. What are sacred cows?
Well, there are things that we deem as important. There are things that we are willing to defend that aren't necessarily relevant to making disciples aren't necessarily relevant to community or cultural transformation. It's just how we do it. So we can, there are methodologies that I'm used to and things that we've done that I sit back and I say, wow, that's not really important. As a matter of fact, it may be counterproductive to the very thing that you're trying to achieve. And what I'm seeing sometimes is that our preferences become principle, and that's what becomes our sacred cows. It's my personal preference. It's my philosophical or theological preference that becomes the principle, and I'm willing to defend that. And we're going to go to the hill on that. And I'm willing to I'm willing to die on the hill for this particular thing simply because I like it that way. So we're still arguing about worship styles, and we're still arguing about things that are, for example, I tend to differentiate, some argue with me, but I tend to differentiate multi-ethnic from multicultural. I think that every church has its own culture. I don't think that there is a multiculturalism as it relates to in the local congregation. There may be multiple ethnicities, and the leadership of that particular ministry, based upon the multiple ethnicities, have decided to create a certain culture. But if we want to argue choir music versus CCM, if we want to argue, those kinds of situations, we all have them. I find myself, I'll be very transparent. I'm still looking for a church home for my family when I'm not on the road. So here's a sacred cow for me. I walk into a local church. I look to see if there's an organ. If there's no organ, I pretty much know I'm not going to be able to stay here long term because I'm a worshiper. I love all of it. But at some point, my sacred cow, at some point in that worship service, I need to hear that Hammond cranking. And so I know that if I walk into a place and there is no organ, there's a certain culture, there's a certain style, and I'm going to love it. But I'm going to then go to my car and find a CD with some Hammond in it and somebody doing what I'm used to.
Don't say CD, Bishop. We really want you to pull your phone up, your device up. And
And I use that in particular. Here's the challenge is that sometimes in order to have what you want, you got to go back to something that is out of date. And so here I am trying to find a CD because I'm trying to be out of date. And so it is crazy that we will actually die on mountains for certain things. We still have the issues. One of the big issues right now that is so ridiculous is I remember when my band started wearing their caps in church years ago, and so I was like, oh, I don't know if I like this. And so then they didn't fight me. I took myself through a process of, okay, let me defend my position on this. And what I discovered was I couldn't. I couldn't. I just didn't like it. So but we end up acquiescing. Do I keep a young man not just playing for me, but do I keep a young man because right now the only reason he's in church is because he's playing? And do I keep that young man continuing to hear the word of God, or do I send him back out because of a new era baseball cap?
Well, the good thing is, Bishop, you were you were emotionally healthy. I didn't want to say emotionally healthy, but you were leadership healthy enough to wrestle with that internally before you did a public
Right.
a public I was getting ready to say lynching, but that may not be
No,
culturally
we
right.
try to stay away from that word, but we do have a tendency of laying down the law from the pulpit.
Oh yeah, we quickly use that verse. Open rebuke is
Right,
better.
right. There's some other verses though that we might want to take a look at that can affect our leadership.
Absolutely. So Bishop, I think you jump into something that's really, I think, very appropriate for our discussion about where the church is, and I want to dovetail that with what you said about this idea that some churches are too far down the road to even change. Man, that's so sobering, because what do you do to the church that's too far down the road, and people are still visiting their church or coming to the church?
It's tough, and some would say, we all have the power of the Holy Spirit, and we all, to say that a congregation is too far down to change is contradictory to the work of the Spirit. And my response would be that the Spirit works on us if we allow Him, and if the change is too challenging. Quick story, Christopher. In my first church, I started pastoring in 1990. In my first church, when I got there, the church didn't have a computer in 1990. They had IBM Selectrics in 1990. I had a secretary. I was 23. By the time I hired her, I was 24. She was 72. She was 72.
Can I ask why you hired a 72-year-old?
Because I was 24, and if anybody was going to create any rumor with me and my secretary, they were going to have to be Steven Spielberg and be very, very creative. When I sent my team out to look, I gave them age requirements. And they said, Pastor, that's age discrimination. I said, at this point, I don't care. This is what I need.
So you were single at the time?
No, I was married at the time. But it doesn't matter to people when they want to create rumors, whether you're single or married.
Well, but I know that's I'll finish the story because I want to come right back to that for a point.
And so she worked for me for a year. When we bought the computer system, she came to me and she said, Pastor, I'm gonna have to resign. I said, why? Her name was Pauline Jackson. God rest her soul. I said, why, Miss Jackson? She said, because I can learn this computer, but I don't want to. She says, I'm 73 years old. I've done all the learning I want to learn. I just want to do the things that I already know. And today, that sounds crazy. To her, she's like, I've retired. I'm wise. I know I just did this to make some extra money and to serve God. I am not getting ready to learn all of this new stuff. I don't want to. She says, not that I can't, it's I don't want to. And I think the same principle applies to some churches, that it's not that they can't, they just don't want to, because you're asking me to embrace something now that is so unlike my 50 or 60 years of history. You're asking me to add something to my toolbox, and I've been carrying this toolbox with these tools for 40 years, and now I don't want to change that much. And so you've got congregations who, and you've seen it, you've got congregations when you walk in there, you think you have walked 25, 30 years back in time. You think, what is going on? And it's working for them because they're really not trying to change the world. They're really not trying to build the kingdom. They want to provide space for people to comfortably come, worship, fellowship, and learn. So if I find a space that I'm comfortable worshiping, fellowshipping with the people I know, and learning what I want to learn, then we can do this and go on and see Jesus.
So you would argue the point then that many of those churches, they're only interested in making Sunday happen, and not even in an innovative way. Let's just get through a couple hours of service, and then let's just go home. We're not interested in doing any community engagement, strong discipleship. They're not interested in building systems. They're not interested in developing people. They're not trying to be cutting edge in any way, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what I hear you saying?
Well, no, what you hear me saying is I think you've said in that 10 seconds, you said a lot of things that I think have to be separated. There are those who do community engagement. They are shaped from a social activist era of church. So they do community engagement. They came on the heels of whether it's of age or whether it's who they were raised by, because I've seen young preachers who are younger than us who are irrelevant to their own generation. They're in their 20s and 30s and early 40s. They're irrelevant to their own generations based on who raised them in ministry. And so you will have people, they're engaged in social action. They may have come on the heels of the late 70s and 80s and did a little community outreach and economic development. They may be doing some housing programs. They may have all of that going on. But you can have all of that going on and not desire to be innovative and cutting edge. And so they're doing their activities, but Sunday morning is their blanket. This is my place of comfort. This is what I'm used to, and I really don't want that upset in order to be innovative or to build systems. We grew up in churches. Here was the system. The system was the pastor said. That was the system. And so with that in mind, a lot of our fathers in ministry and the like are going to struggle in today's culture because today's Christian doesn't take orders.
And they don't take orders, and they assume that you want collaboration.
Absolutely. And that is a presupposition that may be false, because I really don't want, you mentioned the word collaboration. Collaboration requires some conversation, and I'm not trying to be alliterative, but I'm really, one of the things that I've seen over the last 3.5, 4 years is, especially in the African American experience, we're not good at conversation. We're not good at conversation. What you are doing with this podcast is novel because you are engaging in conversation, and the conversation does not have to be, we don't all have to have the same beliefs and the same philosophy in order to engage in conversation. The African American church, and I'm speaking in generalizations, but we are good at declaration and proclamation. We're not necessarily good at conversation, because conversation requires me to listen. And then once we listen, we may have to come to a common ground. Our conversation gets us to rise to a point of agreement. We come to a common ground in which we are now able to move from that conversation and move into action. In many cases, if I'm a congregant now and I arrive with that presupposition, depending on the philosophy of the leader and the philosophy of the church, that presupposition may be very, very false.
That's That's so good. And let me just say, Bishop, that I often struggle because you even talked about the generational or inclusion of generational idea, right? Leadership amongst generations, and how one generation views another one or engages with the other. And I get it because I was raised by my grandparents.
Okay.
A portion of my childhood. And so I was able to see things and appreciate things in a way differently than some of my contemporaries. At the same time, I would argue that particularly my grandfather, was very innovative for his age.
Okay.
So while he may have been 70, he thought like a 45-year-old.
Got it.
Operated like a 45-year-old while he was 70. And he just did stuff that made sense. So if it makes sense, even if it means as a 70-year-old that I need to apologize, then I'm gonna apologize. Or even if that means, we're gonna take the high road on this, or whatever it may be. And so when I'm blessed, fortunate, and I'd love to talk with you some more about this, but as a church consultant, you go into many of our churches, and specifically today, so we've got a number of people that have been on the podcast in this discussion about defending the church, and we've had some that have talked about it from a multi-ethnic church standpoint. We've had some talk about it from a white church or evangelical church standpoint. Today, we're going to deal with a little bit of the African-American context, so we're going to do that unapologetically. And so when I go into our churches, African-American churches, I'm a little frustrated because I'm like, here it is that you have a leader who has degrees, who has a certain platform, certain levels of exposure. You walk into their office and it's a library. I mean, they've got the books.
Right.
It's no doubt that they know what to read.
Right.
But then when you listen to the challenges and the leadership concerns, there's a huge disconnect. And so I guess, what do we do with that? How do we respond to that? What's the solution?
Well, I think a part of that disconnect is relationship. And I think in many cases, the whole leadership dynamic for us is counterproductive to relationships. I will speak from the African-American perspective because that's really all that I know, but I'll also speak from the standpoint of the episcopacy in the African-American church. And I love it. When I say I love it, I love and respect it. I understand it. I've never prized it. I think there's a difference between loving it and prizing it. I've never prized it. And this in no way speaks negatively at all on the episcopacy from the African-American perspective. But it was one of its drawbacks was it made relationship less important, because once you start embracing so much hierarchy, then the power of relationship across sectors and across levels becomes so much more, so much less embraced, I'll say it that way, that we forget about relationship. And so our relationships become with our peers, but then our peers are in a certain sector, and then we don't know how, in many cases, if we're not careful, to be able to have relationship outside of that. One of the things that I've tried to do, and I made some mistakes with, even in the context of my congregation, it got so bad for me that I dismantled a lot of the episcopacy and the graces and all of that I dismantled it in Hope Fellowship Church. That was a mistake. I went from one extreme to the other. And so I should have found a middle ground. I got sick of the fact of hearing people slip and say to me, so-and-so said we can't talk to you because you're the bishop. And so-and-so says, and I got sick of that. So I dismantled all of it, went to the other extreme, threw the baby out with the bathwater, and then in our house lost the respect of the episcopacy. So I made that mistake. But all I was really trying to get after is to deconstruct all of these things that were getting in the way of me having collaboration. And so that's an example of it. I think another example of it is our willingness to just be us. Scripture says, God told Abraham, I'm going to make your name great. He didn't say, I'm going to give you a great title. And so the greater the people are, the less you use their title. Matter of fact, in sports and in music and all of that, the great ones are known by one name. When you say Michael, somebody says which one, Jordan or Jackson. But we gravitated so much in the infancy of it to the titles that we stopped trying to be great people and just rolled the wave of the title. And then what ends up happening is it made us less prepared to do collaborative leadership. If that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. If we were in a setting that had a Hammond just then, I'd have yelled one name, Triplett. That's solid. That's solid. For those that are listening and they may not know what episcopacy is, that is related to the idea of ordination, consecration with certain titles or authorities, bishops, overseers, elders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you really, I think, have to also understand the historical matriculation for African Americans regarding our titles and even our identity being so wrapped into it. Because in many cases, particularly from the Protestant United States standpoint, the church was often the only place where African Americans' identity was affirmed.
Absolutely.
Where leadership was given, and all of that. And so, whereas you go to a church that's non-denominational, primarily white or a white culture, and they're calling the pastor by the first name, in some cases, it's not that the black pastor is stuck on a name. From a historical context,
right?
The self concept, the affirmation, the validation, all of that came from saying Bishop such and such, or
Absolutely.
Pastor such and such, or Reverend such and such. And so I think that it has to be appreciated, because even growing up in the black church, I'm not sure that I understood. So obviously we have the reverence and
right.
respect, but I'm not sure that I understood it from a historical standpoint.
And you're absolutely right. And I want the listeners to know that I'm not in any way denigrating or disrespecting. I'm just trying to show where it can get in the way. And you are absolutely right. My parishioners wouldn't have been able to handle, because of our history. If I had stood up in our church and said, you know what? Everybody just call me Brother Derek. It doesn't work. It does not work in the African American situation.
You would have been the topic of everybody's Sunday dinner. Y'all, what's wrong with Pastor?
Right. What's wrong with him? Does he need a vacation? Does he need something wrong with him? It just doesn't work. But on the flip side, when we take this to 2018 and beyond, the things that we prize, there's a certain sector who doesn't care. So they don't care about your title. That is that's the millennial Christian born in church. They don't care. They if they see you as a father figure, then they embrace that. So you'll end up with a lot of, in our situation, dad and pop more than bishop, or those that we're trying to reach, whether who are unsaved and unchurched. And we've got to remember, the adults today were raised by the first non-church generation in North America, in the United States of America. So they don't have an appreciation for the alleged and the necessary respect. They don't care. They are relational. Do you add value to my life? Is there a consistency between what you say and what I see? Is there a bridge between what you do on Sunday and the condition of my community? They don't care. And because they don't care, we've got to figure out a way to really embrace them because they don't care. And if Bishop so-and-so, they don't care.
So let me ask you this, Bishop. You know, we're having dialogue, and in no way. So I don't want to. I agree with you in that in many cases, the level of reverence or the level of priority that non-churched or de-churched or unchurched would put on the titles. I don't know. I would almost argue the point, though, that maybe it's not that they don't care. It's that if you're going to have the title, do the work of the title.
I love it. I agree with this so much. Is there a consistency between, I'm not advocating the drinking of sugary soft drinks. I'm just making a metaphor. I don't want to open a Pepsi can and taste 7-Up. So just be who your label says you're going to be, because I'm smart enough to do my own research on what you should be based on your label.
Thanks again for joining us on another episode of the Wise Idea Podcast with Christopher J. Harris. We hope you enjoyed our time together. If you did and would like additional resources and information, you can find the previous episodes, show notes, featured guest information, and more at www.thewiseideapodcast.com. We also invite you to join the conversation on social media. The Wise Idea Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook. Find us at The Wise Idea and at our Facebook group, The Wise Idea Podcast. On Instagram, find us at The Wise Idea Podcast. Our host is also on social media. You can find him regularly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Pinterest, all located at CJ Harris 1. Finally, if you enjoyed what you've heard, head over to iTunes and/or Google Play and leave a rating and review for other listeners to find us. Our podcast is also on Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for joining us. We will see you the next time. Live wisely.
Understanding. I say, what's the missing principal thing?